The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Students of the Game. My name is Alex Baumann, and joined by my co-host today, Nathan Glidewell. With the NBA offseason kind of taking a back burner to what's happening in college football now, we're going to hop into some college football, starting out with Alabama and moving into SEC football with the media days happening this week from the July 15th to the 18th. So, Nathan, let's jump into what happened with Alabama over the weekend, getting 2025 five-star commits from Caleb Cunningham and then Ty Haywood. Cunningham being the receiver and then Haywood being an offensive tackle. And this bumping up Alabama to be the number one recruiting class for the 2025 class per On3. What are your thoughts on what Kalen DeBoer has done for the Crimson Tide in just a short period of time?
I mean, it's been nothing short of incredible. I think you go back to all the tweets and comments made when he was first hired, when Saban left, talking about the downfall of Alabama recruiting or Alabama as a whole. And here we are, middle of July, and he currently holds the number one recruiting class for 2025. I know this on three. You look on other sites, it might say differently. But the fact that the recruiting has basically stayed at the same pace of what Saban has done has been incredible. I think you look at Kalen DeBoer and the type of connections he's been able to make with players, and really instill confidence in the Alabama brand still. I think you break down the whole month when he was first hired, the number of transfers that left, the number of decommits. But in order, I think the biggest momentum shift was when he's able to get Ryan Williams to recommit. I think that really showed a lot of other players in future commits that says, hey, everything's fine, everything's in a steady pace. And they really believe in Kalen DeBoer. I believe in Kalen DeBoer and what he's going to be able to do. But as far as like picking up a number one wide receiver for the class of 2025, that's already checked off with Caleb Cunningham. He's a terrific talent, really just vertical. He makes spectacular catches. I'm really excited about him. And then another guy I talked about who I think will end up committing soon, whether that to be to Texas or to Bama, and Cleet Lockett, which I think if we got him, then that would just be like over the top. I don't know, because you talk about that class. I get excited just thinking about it. It hasn't happened. But then you go and look at Ty Haywood, who is just he is a mountain of a man. 6'5", 285 pounds. The way he's been able to play throughout high school, it's just domination. And going into, Texas and all these other states and being able to recruit at a high level and take these top level guys from that state really means a lot for the Alabama brand. But it really shows that Kalen DeBoer knows how to outwork some of these other coaches that have already been there. We talk about the Kirby Smarts of the world, the Ryan Days, the people who have been there and already kind of have their base set up. And I really think it's been cool to see Kalen compete with guys like that. And then you break down the state of Alabama as a whole, the way Kalen has just kept it towards Alabama and really not had to compete with Hugh Freeze all that much for the guys he's wanted. Auburn has gotten some of their guys from the state, but for the most part, Kalen DeBoer, if he has seen someone, he has gotten them. So, if you're not excited for Alabama football at this point, I don't know who is.
Yeah, like you said, Nathan, Kalen DeBoer has done amazing things for Alabama. There was a lot of expectation that he was not going to come in and can stay up with what Saban has been doing these past 10, 15 years. So for him to come in day one and to build this roster the way he's done it in this coming up season and then going into 2025 is nothing short of amazing. He exceeded my expectations. I didn't think he was going to be Husky Carson, but I didn't think he was going to be the next Nick Saban when it came to recruiting. And he's proven that he can be an elite level recruiter. Not just him, but his general manager, Courtney Morgan, has done an amazing job.
Has been fantastic.
And the assistants there have done a great job. The offensive line coach for Bama was all over Ty Haywood when he came to visit. And Haywood mentioned that was a big part of his decision to come to Alabama, was how into the visit that the offensive line coach was and how invested he was into Haywood. So it just goes to show that Kalen DeBoer has surrounded himself with a bunch of excellent people, a bunch of excellent recruiters. And I'm excited to see what the future holds. going into 2026 and 2027 and years to go on. Because it's one thing to say you get a number one recruiting class in 1 year, but it's got to be consistent, especially to Alabama. You can't just have one good class and massively fall off, which I don't expect that to happen with Kalen DeBoer. He has done an amazing job thus far. But one thing to not get tied up on is these 5 stars, these 4 stars, because as we've seen in the past, stars are not everything. Mac Jones was only a 3-star recruit, I believe. There's been some 5 stars that came to Alabama that have busted. Antonio Alfano is a big one I think about. Number one overall recruit, came into Bama and disappeared, had to transfer to Colorado. I know he dealt with some off the field stuff we can't really get into, but don't really look into these stars all that much. Players will come into Bama. You'll see some stay, some leave, but just to be able to bring in these high level recruits is nothing short of amazing for Kalen DeBoer in year one.
Yeah, I think it's really important, like you said, Alex, to kind of keep a level head when you talk about recruiting and you talk about stars, because at the end of the day, stars don't mean anything. It's about what the product of you put out on the field. And with I like how he's recruited, but at the end of the day, it's about how you coach during the game and how you prepare and really just develop players as a whole. And then it's about team success. I think you look at some past Alabama teams and maybe they went a little bit away from that and they didn't reach their end goal because they were more focused on individual success, whether that be their future in the NFL or whatever other endeavors they wanted to accomplish. I think that's a big part of it too. But on top of that, I think it's also important to have realistic expectations for Kalen DeBoer's first year. I'm not saying, hey, he's going to go out and win the national championship. He's going to go undefeated, because I mean, you look at college football and where it is in its current state, that's just a extremely hard thing to do. But I think he will be a successful coach. And I don't know, I've joked around with a lot of people and said that he's going to win the national championship in his first year. And I think I will truly make that bet that he will. I think he will surprise a lot of people. I don't think he'll go undefeated, but I think he'll win a national championship in his first year. I like the way the roster is constructed. I think everyone will have a chip on their shoulder. But we'll see. I'm just a crazy Alabama fan.
Yeah, I think Kalen DeBoer has won half the battle. He's got recruiting down, can he get the coaching in the game down? That's the other half of the battle he has to win. And what he did at Washington, what he's done in his other stops, Indiana, Fresno State, all that, if he can repeat that, then I'll be happy as an Alabama fan. I think all Alabama fans will be happy. Fans of other teams probably not, like Georgia, Auburn. They'll probably be mad. They wanted to see Alabama's downfall.
They're
But
already
Kalen DeBoer,
mad.
Kalen DeBoer has won half the battle, and I'm excited to see if he can win the next 50%.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on to SEC Media Days, Nathan. They were happening, like I mentioned, this week, July 15th through the 18th in Dallas, Texas. It's the first Media Days with Texas and Oklahoma as a part of the SEC. So big things happening there all around the conference. You had Nick Saban on day one, forget his credentials, get denied at the gate. The security guard told him he knew who he was, but he could not get in because he did not have his credentials. But he ended up making it there, got on TV, and he had some interesting things to say. One being that he had picked Texas and Georgia to play in the SEC championship. And he followed up saying, I believe in our Alabama team too. I believe in Jalen Milroe, but until the issues in the secondary get resolved, it's hard to kind of jump on that bandwagon. Nathan, what are your thoughts on Saban's comments?
I think it was a little bit of fuel, number one. You talked about the number of times Saban discussed rat poison when he was a head coach and how the media really just hypes everyone up. I think this is more to put a chip on Alabama's shoulder, and not just say, hey, we're the greatest thing. But I think there are, I mean, realistic expectations. Like you talk about the secondary where it is, you talk about not having Caleb Downs anymore. You talk about Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid going to the draft. It's a lot to replace. And I know we got some good transfers in Keon Sabb and Jackson. And I mean, it's a young roster. I think it will be successful. But as far as like right now, I mean, yeah, does the secondary have issues? Yes. I think he's completely correct in that statement. But really, it's been a long off season. I think they've developed well, and as you go through the season, you learn a lot about a team's composition. And I look at our secondary and where they are talent wise. I mean, they had the talent to do it, and it's just about learning to play the game right. I don't know, but I didn't really take it to heart. I think most Alabama fans really understood what he was doing with that statement. some people might think, oh my gosh, Saban's just like anti-Alabama now, but that's not it. The only person I know who is just Greg Matt. Gosh, we can talk about Greg Maxwell here in a minute, but I don't think anyone truly who has coached or played at Alabama really hates Alabama.
Yeah, I think Saban hit it right on the head though with talking about the secondary issues because, like you said, Terry Arnold's gone, Kool-Aid's gone. You lost Caleb Downs to the transfer portal. You brought in a lot of young recruits and some transfers that are really unproven. So it's going to take a minute to see these guys go out in the field and prove themselves. Because as college football fans, we don't know what they're going to look like. We don't know how this defense is going to mesh together. I think the offense, there's a lot less question marks because you have Jalen Milroe. Can he take that next step? A lot of people say he can. What's that running back rotation look like with Justice Haynes and Jam Miller and Richard Young? What's the receiving core look like? It's much improved, I think, from last season. Jeremy Bernard, Ryan Williams, Kendrick Law, a lot of guys there. Caleb Odom as well. The offensive line looks like it's in a much better place than last season. No more Seth McLaughlin, Nathan. That luckily for your
Yeah,
mental
my
health.
temper, my anger, yeah.
You got Parker Brailsford playing the center spot, Jaden Roberts, Tyler Booker at the guard positions. You bring back Caden Proctor. Can he take that next step, kind of like Jalen Milroe? And who fills out that right tackle spot, whether that's Elijah Pritchett or someone else? So I think Saban hit it right on the head. The biggest question mark isn't that secondary. And this Bama team has a lot more to prove than teams like Texas and Georgia, who have a lot of established players still on that roster. Texas having Quinn Ewers, a lot of the offensive starters returning, two great tackles, get Isaiah Bond from Alabama, a really good defense, Anthony Hill Jr. at linebacker, get the edge, Trey Moore out of the transfer portal, who I think might be an all SEC type player, maybe win defensive player of the year. Georgia has Carson Beck back, has a lot of weapons offensively, got a good offensive line, and then a lot of weapons on defense that I could sit here for about 45 minutes and break down how good they are on defense. So Bama has a lot more to prove than those teams, and that's kind of what Nick Saban was pointing out here with this comment. So looking at all the teams, Nathan, their schedules in the SEC, it appears it's going to be a much more difficult and sort of cluster of SEC teams this season than it has been in the past, where it's kind of been Alabama, LSU at that top in the West, and Georgia, and most recently Tennessee atop the East. But there's no more divisions. It's all going to be who has the best record at the end of the season. So what do you expect going into the season with the new teams being Texas and Oklahoma and these really difficult schedules for everybody around the conference?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to break down how impactful Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC is. Really, the changing of everyone's schedules. You have two new opponents that really bring a big punch to the table. I think I look at Georgia's schedule most of all, having to go to Texas. I recognize that game. It's huge, but they also had to play at Alabama. They have Auburn at home. Of course, Tennessee, Ole Miss, who could really be a dark horse team. I think they're very thankful they don't have to play a team like Missouri this season, because if they were playing Missouri, I mean, it's another one of those
It was
games.
close last season.
I know. It's just one of those games that it's a time in the SEC where there are a lot of teams that have gotten to the point where they've recruited so well and developed so well that they can compete for the top spot. And really, you're not going to have any clue. Obviously, you can highlight the teams that are usually there. You had the Georgias, the Alabamas of the world. You had Texas coming in, who has been really, really good for some time now. But then you have these teams that have kind of stepped up their game over the past few seasons. Missouri, with what they've been able to do, especially last season, they really surprised a lot of people. I think they will continue to surprise people. And then you have a team in Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin has done a fantastic job with the recruiting there and the development of players there. And then you have some other teams that you're like, do I want to bet on them or not? LSU is one of those teams that is very talented, but their defense is a huge question mark. Oklahoma on both sides of the ball has times where they struggle, but I think they are very talented as well. But joining a new conference, that's a whole nother issue. And then Auburn, where are they in their development? Where can they go with the roster they have currently? Because I think several of these teams have done just a great job, and I haven't even talked about Texas A&M or Tennessee. It's a very loaded and set conference that really, at any point in the season, you talk about the number of injuries. I mean, one play decides games most of the time. So I could sit here and tell you that Georgia and Alabama will go play for the SEC championship, and I might be right. But we might be sitting here in December and have Missouri and Ole Miss competing for it, and we're like, "What is going on? This doesn't make any sense." Which, I mean, it's entirely plausible at this point, especially with the whole no more divisions thing. I think that's going to be a little weird for everyone. What happens if two teams that were in the West recently, or in the past, go into the game? It just feels strange. Or if Alabama and Auburn somehow have the best two records and they have to play and they have an Iron Bowl in back-to-back weeks. You think about stuff like that. That is just really mind-blowing. But as far as like the whole schedule stuff, and the win totals, I mean, we could break them down if you want, Alex. It might take
I
some
know
time.
we might be here a little long, but just go in like who do you think is going to be the top three teams in the conference?
Well, I'll get Georgia number one. Kirby Smart, very, very good coach. I think currently probably the best coach in college football. He knows
Yeah.
how to coach his team. He knows how to get to where he needs to go. I think I'll have them one, and then with a tied ranking, I think I'll have Texas and Alabama. And then I think following will probably be Ole Miss and Missouri. I think those two, and then I think LSU after that. I think everyone's a little too high up on LSU. I don't know if I truly believe in Grant Nussmeier. I don't believe in that defense. I think they still have a lot of issues, and even though they're extremely talented, I don't know if they can really replicate some of the success they had last season, because they are now without a Heisman winning quarterback. So
And two, their
that's what I
starting
would go.
receivers.
Yeah, that too.
And they lost their starting running back to Ole Miss. Logan Diggs went to Ole Miss. So you basically have a whole entire new offense outside of some offensive linemen. You have Will Campbell, who I think is probably the best offensive tackle in the country, offensive lineman. But I mean, there's a lot of question marks on both sides, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that would definitely be my top three to I guess however many teams I mentioned. But I mean, if you go and bet on Georgia, I think it's just a continuous safe bet, and until they prove or another team proves otherwise that they are top of the conference, I think Georgia would have to be there, even with lost Alabama last year in the SEC championship.
Yeah, I think Georgia's there as well, alongside Alabama and Texas. But I do think a team like Oklahoma could be very sneaky. They have a pretty difficult schedule, but if they can get through the games like at Auburn and like at Ole Miss and like at LSU, I think they can be really sneaky. It just depends on what Jackson Arnold looks like. He played okay in their bowl game, but he showed times where he was a little bit timid and a little bit out of sorts. So can he grow in his sophomore season? That defense already by itself is really good. Danny Stutzman at linebacker, Billy Bowman at defensive back is probably one of the best defenses Oklahoma has had in a minute, considering their head coach was Lincoln Riley a few years ago. It's not a high standard to be at with that defense he runs, but what Brent Venables has done in Oklahoma, they can be really sneaky. But I do expect Alabama, Georgia, and Texas to be at that top three spots in the SEC. And I don't know. I think it might come down to Georgia and Alabama again. It's just a consistent thing in the SEC. But there's anybody. It's like anybody's conference this year. It's not like it used to be. It's not the Alabama is kind of has a shoe into the SEC championship almost, or LSU, Alabama are kind of battling, and now there's really no competition. So I like how competitive it's going to be this season, and I'm excited to see who comes out of this conference.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at all the schedules, Nathan, who do you think has the most difficult one outside of Florida? Because I think that's probably the
Yeah,
most
I was
difficult
like,
schedule
Florida is an
in
automatic.
the country.
I mean, you mentioned Oklahoma and who they have to play. Of course, Texas is always on their schedule, so I mean that's an automatic tough game. But then they have Alabama at home. They have to go on the road at Ole Miss, LSU, and Missouri, who all three are very, very good teams. They still have to go to Auburn, which I mean we know how sneaky of a spot that is. They have Tennessee at home, which is a very good team, and then South Carolina. I don't think a lot of people talk about South Carolina enough and the talent that they brought in the offseason. But that can be a trap game. So I think Oklahoma probably has the second toughest schedule. But Florida, poor Florida, man. I don't know where they found that schedule at.
No, they didn't find it. They were given that schedule. Poor Billy Napier, honestly. Dude has been given zero chance there down in Gainesville. I feel bad for him. I think he can be a great head coach somewhere, but it's just like Florida has just screwed him every way possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think a team that has a really difficult schedule is Arkansas. You just talk about Sam Pittman on the hot seat, probably the hottest seat in the SEC alongside Billy Napier. Draws UAB, which I think would be a pretty difficult game. I know UAB is not what it used to be under Bill Clark, but Trent Dilfer has got that team trending in the right direction. Jacob Zeno's back for his final season at quarterback. They brought in a lot of pieces. They have to go to Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State has Ollie Gordon at running back. Their quarterback situation is a little bit of a question mark. Will it be
The
Alan Bowman?
coaching
Will it be
situation's a little question mark.
yeah, so they go to Auburn, Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas, at Missouri. La Tech could be a difficult game. So their non-conference schedule really does not help them out, and we could be sitting here seeing Sam Pittman out mid-season because he brought in with Bobby Petrino to be the offensive coordinator. So maybe Bobby Petrino takes over for the final 5 games of the season or something. But Arkansas is in a tough spot. Lose KJ Jefferson, lose Rocket Sanders, bring in a Boise State quarterback to be the new starting quarterback. It's just tough for Arkansas. And it's weird considering the spot they were in under Sam Pittman in his first year. They were looking up, and it's just like they fell off a cliff. What team do you think might surprise us, Nathan, going into the season and in the end? Who might surprise us the most?
Gosh, I mean, that's hard. There's just so many competitive teams in the conference, but I highlighted South Carolina a little bit. I think South Carolina will surprise a lot of people. I like the way that they have developed over the past few seasons. I think they've been there. They know how to win some of the games. You talked about Tennessee a few years ago when they were riding in hot and they just completely knocked them off. They have time where they were in games and I felt like they shot themselves in the foot. So I feel like they're just a little bit away from being able to win some of these bigger games. Maybe you talk about knocking off LSU at home or Ole Miss at home. They have Texas A&M at home. I think that's a very winnable game. Missouri coming to town. I think some of their home games are more favorable. I think they can pull off some big upsets. And then you talk about at Kentucky. I think that's a spot where if they play the game right, they can find a way to win. I don't think that they can really win at Alabama or Oklahoma or at Clemson. I think those are very, very tough games, but I think their home schedule is very favorable for them to really get momentum behind them and really have a more successful season than most people were thinking. I mean, their over under for wins is 5.5. I would take the over pretty instantly, even with the recent roster kind of turnover. I think I would still take it at over. I mean, you talk about losing Spencer Rattler. I mean, that's a big loss for them, but I mean, they have a lot of young guys, a lot of young
Lenore
talented
Sellers
guys.
coming in.
I mean, I mean, you can talk about the receivers too. I mean, they have
Nick
some very,
Harbor.
very yeah. Nick
Dude.
Harbor is fast. He is very talented. So I think I'm excited to watch their offense alone. But it's the question mark on defense. We'll see. But South Carolina is definitely my pick.
If Florida didn't have the schedule of the century, I would say Florida might be a sneaky good team with Graham Mertz. He played pretty good last season. I'm really on that Graham Mertz bandwagon, but what their schedule looks like, I can't pick Florida to be over their over-under win total being 4.5. I can't go over that. They just have too difficult of a schedule. You got to go to Texas. You have every difficult team in the SEC. The only semi-bye you get in the SEC or semi-easier game would be Mississippi State. That's really the only easy.
But you still had to go to Mississippi State.
Yeah, the Cowbells. That's going to be. They really don't have an easy game. I mean, Sanford's their only like.
But Sanford's a good team.
Yeah, it's like they're only like you say teams with a gimme game on their schedule. That's their gimme game, but it's really not a gimme game for Florida.
Yeah, and we talk about Florida's recent issues with playing some lesser opponents.
But I kind of touched on it earlier. I think Oklahoma, they're over under being 7.5 wins. I think they could be, like I said, a sneaky good team. If Jackson Arnold can figure it out in the early season and carry that momentum into the difficult part of their schedule, I think they can beat some teams, upset some teams. I think they do get a win either against Alabama or Texas. They have both those teams at home. And I think they do. They played Texas competitively in the past. They played them competitively under Brett Venables. So I think Oklahoma does get a win either between Texas or Alabama and sort of carries the momentum throughout the season. And I think they do probably get 8 or 9 wins, maybe even 10. But I think 8 or 9 is a good safe bet for Oklahoma and to exceed expectations.
A lot of faith in Brett Venables there.
How they finished last season, it wasn't an amazing finish, but they had a lot of bright flashes. They got a lot of good players. That defense is probably top 3 in the SEC this season. Probably top 4. Sorry, top 4. Who do you think might disappoint us, Nathan?
Disappointing. I mean, LSU
Outside of Florida.
LSU is definitely going to disappoint a lot of people. I think, I mean, you break down where they were last season. I don't think a lot of people give Jane Daniels enough credit. And I know that's crazy to say because the dude won the Heisman Trophy, but you look at the roster construction, the offensive line that really played poorly all year long, the defense that was absolutely atrocious, nowhere to be found most games. He really had to put the team on his back more times than not. He made terrific throws. He had to really improvise a lot with his feet. And even with the 2 receivers he had, and especially with Malik Neighbors and what he was able to do, I feel like he was really the center point of the team. And you talk about bringing a great guy in Grant Nussmeier. He's all right. He's not the typical LSU quarterback that you usually see. You talk about the Joe Burrows of the world. You talk about the Jaden Daniels, the more versatile, being able to run away quarterbacks. And he really stays more in the pocket. He has to be able to make the right reads more times than not. He doesn't have the same type of talent in the wide receiver room. His backfield is definitely not as polished, especially with losing his starting running back in the offseason. The offensive line, I don't think has taken a big enough step in this offseason or through the transfer portal to really signify that they're going to be one of the better teams at the conference. And we really haven't broken down their defense enough because I don't think they've done a great job at really replacing a lot of the pieces from that defense since, I don't know, 2019. I think you have to get all the way back then. It's just one of those teams where their over-unders at 9.5. And getting to 9 wins in this conference is going to be really, really hard, especially with the schedule they had. They had to go to South Carolina. They have to go to Texas A&M. I mean, Florida. I know we drag Florida through the mud sometimes with how they played recently, but playing at Florida, playing in the swamp is a difficult challenge. Having Oklahoma at home, I mean, that can go either way sometimes. And then you still have Ole Miss and Alabama, which are 2 very, very good teams. So getting to that 9-win mark is going to be a very difficult challenge. And I just don't think they have enough development. They haven't gone through enough adversity yet to really warrant them getting to 9 wins this season.
I'm not buying the Missouri hype. I'm not buying it.
I wouldn't buy it either. I think they struggle sometimes.
Their over-under is 9.5 wins. They lose a lot of starters on defense, a ton. Their secondary was decimated. They lost Tyron Hopper at linebacker, lose some pretty good pass rushers, Darius Robinson. Then you flip on the offensive side of the football. Losing Cody Schrader at running back is humongous. They brought in some guys in the transfer portal, but there's just no way they can replicate what Cody Schrader did for Missouri last season. And I know you have Brady Cook coming back. You got Luther Burden. Burden might be the best receiver in the country, but I wasn't sold on Brady Cook last season. There were a lot of games where he made some huge
bonehead
decisions. I'm just not buying it. Their schedule is very favorable considering how difficult everybody's schedule in the SEC is this season. They have Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, Vanderbilt, at UMass. They have to go to Texas A&M and go to Alabama. Both are predicted to be losses, and I think both those probably are losses. I think they slip up against Oklahoma. Auburn might give them a run for their money. Auburn, if they can figure it out under Hugh Freeze in year 2, could be very scary for Missouri. Something. You kind of touched on it. We were talking earlier. At Mississippi State could be an issue. At South Carolina could also be an issue. So this schedule on paper looks somewhat easier than most teams in the SEC. But going into the season, when what happens throughout the season, it might be a lot more difficult than what people are expecting. So I don't think Missouri hits the 9.5 and even 9-win mark. I think they probably hit 8 wins this season. I think there's a lot of games they can slip up on. And Brady Cook, I'm not sold on. I don't think he's this great quarterback. I'm not sold on Eli Drinkwitz as a head coach. That team last season reminded me a lot of what Arkansas did under Sam Pittman in his first year when they kind of exceeded expectations. So I don't think Missouri has that type of season in the SEC, even though their schedule is very favorable. Nathan, you look at all these teams. What coach is on the hot seat other than Sam Pittman and Billy Napier? What other coach do you think is on the hottest seat?
I mean, we could talk the situation that really would upset a lot of people. But let's say Auburn has another down year. I mean, they Auburn likes to win and they like to beat Alabama. That's one of the biggest things is they like to win the Iron Bowl. Well, I mean, what's the streak on for Alabama at right now, Alex? Is it 4 years?
It's
Is it?
four because it's four.
Yeah, 4 years. How much longer can Auburn go without beating Alabama before they replace their coach again? I think that was a whole issue with. I mean, that's been a issue for a while now. But if Auburn let's say they barely scoop by, they barely make a bowl again, or let's say they don't even make a bowl. I mean, how many more years are you giving Hugh Freeze to really turn your team around?
Or losing the Birmingham Bowl.
I, I mean, Maryland thumped them. Look, Auburn has the ability, and I mean, we can break down their facilities, how well they've been in the past. I mean, where they've put people in the NFL. They
Their
just
NIL.
have their NIL. I mean, we can break down how many different things they can utilize to really just develop players and have high recruiting classes and really just get back to where Auburn was. I mean, back in the 2010s. But you kind of look at everything now and what Hugh Freeze has done. I mean, I think recruiting for next year has kind of taken a backseat a little bit. They've kind of fallen. They had a top 10 class. They're slowly starting to fall out of that. If Peyton Thorne, I think the biggest mistake that Hugh Freeze has made has not been getting a quarterback out of the transfer portal. I don't know if Peyton Thorne can really guide you through this SEC, especially with their schedule. And if we're sitting here this time that season, and they've gone barely to a bowl, and let's say they lost their bowl matchup, would that be Hugh Freeze's final year at Auburn if he doesn't succeed after that? I think I'll definitely give him this year. I mean, it's so early on in his coaching cycle, but Auburn isn't known to give coaches a lot of leeway because they were one of the more win now fans, and especially you go back to New Mexico State. I think that left a very bad taste in people's mouths. And then the whole Iron Bowl loss. So yeah, I think Hugh Freeze. I think you can say he's warm for now. But I also think he's kind of started on the warm seat anyway, just because of where Auburn was and what they expect. But as far as like other, you kind of took the two away from me that I wanted to use.
Well, that's the cop out answers because they're both they're so apparent that they're on the hot seat. It's not even funny.
That is true. Well, I would probably say Hugh Freeze is definitely there in some sense.
I think Shane Beamer at South Carolina. I know the fans love him. There's a lot of love for Shane Beamer at South Carolina, but if this team doesn't make a bowl game and if they continue to struggle this season, if we don't see the development of Norris Sellers, the defense looks terrible, the offense looks anemic, then I think Shane Beamer does have to go. The South Carolina program, like Auburn, want to win. They're still riding off the Steve Spurrier days in the early 2000s, the 2010s, where they were competitive, or at least somewhat competitive in the SEC. And now they're kind of like bottom feeders in the conference. They've had some pretty close games. They battled Georgia close. They beat Tennessee a couple of years ago when they were riding hot. But can South Carolina get back to being relevant in the SEC and being competitive and at least trying to win 8 games, 9 games a season? And I think Shane Beamer, while he can't do that, if it's another season of we win 5 games, we win 6 games, barely make a bowl game, go to like some crappy bowl, I think South Carolina might just do it and get rid of Shane Beamer. But I do think Hugh Freeze is probably on the 3rd hottest seat in the SEC just because Auburn fans, much more than South Carolina fans, want to win now. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to compete with Alabama. And people think that Hugh Freeze should be out competing Husky Harsin at Alabama, especially when it comes to recruiting. And he hasn't proven that yet. So flipping over to talking about the players here rather than the teams, you see all the quarterbacks, Nathan, there's been some changes, some transfers, obviously with the portal and the NIL being what it is now. Who do you think are the best QBs in the conference? Top 3. Let's just kind of do what we did with the teams. Top 3 quarterbacks.
I think I'll give Quinn Ewers not at number 1. I think his
Carson Beck?
I'm not a big believer in Carson Beck. Brock Bowers Merchant. Anyway, Quinn Ewers is definitely not super polished. I think he has some issues he has to work through to really become the next great quarterback going into the NFL. But you look at his numbers last year, I thought they were pretty superb. I mean, leading his team, I know with the injuries and stuff, to the national, I mean, not the national championship, to the playoffs. I really
Almost.
almost. He was almost there, but I really believe that Quinn Ewers will continue to kind of ride that high. And I think that Texas will be successful because they have him at quarterback. So I think I'd give Quinn Ewers the number one spot. Number two, I think will surprise a lot of people. I like Jackson Dart at number two, and this
Wow.
is because he's very versatile in the way he plays. I think Lane Kiffin has really set him up and put him in the right position, surrounding him with guys who really complement him, and I think that's the whole reason I'm going to put him two is because of the system that he's in. And we're talking like based off like quarterbacks alone. I mean, this list will be completely different, but we're talking about teams here. We're talking about going into that season. I think Jackson Dart might be the second best quarterback in the conference just because of the situation he's in. Number three, I would say Carson Beck as of right now. I can't ignore what he did last season. He made a lot of good plays. He made some good decisions. He also made a lot of bad decisions, which I think that's just a conversation for another time. But I can't really ignore that Georgia has taken a step back on the offensive end with losing Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey. There's just not the same playmakers that Carson Beck once had. I'm going to put him third for now, but I don't know how he will perform this season without those type of guys. I will probably put Jalen Milroe fourth, although I'm looking at Jalen Milroe last season that really didn't really had the best recognition at sometimes, really didn't make all of the right decisions, but he was improving late in the season and he was becoming a type of leader. And if Kalen DeBoer, who has developed some really, really great quarterbacks and most recently put Michael Penix in the NFL and really developed him to be a great quarterback, if he can develop Joe Murrow in the same sense, and I think Joe Murrow might be the best quarterback in the conference at the end of the day if we look at it. But right now, I'll probably have him fourth. Other than that, I mean, a lot of guys kind of fall together. I think you look at Jackson Arnold too, like you said, Alex at Oklahoma. I think he had some bright areas later on in the season, and that he could be a great quarterback. Grant Nussmeier, that's a big one. Graham Mertz, he has issues sometimes. Brady Cook, I think we both talked about him.
Yeah.
And then Connor Wegman, who hasn't had a lot of time playing at Texas A&M, but I think he has a lot of potential. So he might be that next guy. But then you go down towards the bottom tier of the conference. I guess would be led by Peyton Thorne at that point. But yeah, it's hard to go ahead and pick out this quarter. I mean, I didn't even talk about Nico either at Tennessee. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a lot of good quarterbacks that we just haven't been able to watch yet either. So
yeah. I think you kind of touched on it there. It's just there's a lot of quarterbacks in this conference that we haven't watched. Brock Vandergriff at Kentucky. He was a five-star recruit at Georgia. Lenore Sellers, there's a lot of hype around him. Jackson Arnold, we both touched on. Connor Weigman, you touched on there a little bit, Nathan. There's a lot of unproven quarterbacks, a lot of unknowns in this conference where we could be sitting here at the end of the season and Jackson Arnold's the second best quarterback in the conference. Not saying he will be, but there's a chance he could be with how much talent he has and the coaching staff and the players around him offensively. But looking at the season, the way it is right now, I think Quinn Ewers is the number one quarterback going into the season. What he did at Texas last year showed amazing strides, looked like the most polished passer when it came to the Big 12. He dotted up Alabama's defense. Granted, Steve Sarkisian might be the best offensive mind in college football right now. So I think Quinn Ewers starts out as the number one quarterback in the conference. I think followed by Carson Beck. He did have some moments, like you said, where he kind of had lapse of judgment. You said he was a Brock Bowers merchant. I kind of disagree. He did have to work with a little bit less when it came to weapons last year. Brock Bowers dealt with a lot of injuries. He had tightrope surgery. There's Dylan Bell was a good option for him. There's a lot of receivers there. I think Carson Beck, if he takes another step, I think he can be surpass Quinn Ewers as the number one quarterback, but Quinn Ewers to me is a lot more established than Carson Beck. That's why I put him at 2. And then at 3, I put Jalen Milroe. Not sold on Jackson Dart. I know he works under Lane Kiffin, but Jackson Dart, he does not make the best decisions. Granted, Jalen Milroe doesn't either, but I think Jalen Milroe has proven a lot more in his short time in Alabama than Jackson Dart has. I think he provides a lot more offensively when it comes to using his legs and scrambling out of the pocket than Jackson Dart does. I think even though Jackson Dart does use his legs a lot in the Lane Kiffin offense, Jalen Milroe is a lot more athletic and a lot more explosive when it comes to that type of stuff. But this is a wide open thing. We could be sitting here and this top 3 could be completely different than it is right now. I mean, Nico could be number 1 for all I know, but going into the season, I think those guys are the top 3 going into the season. What quarterback might surprise fans, Nathan, other than Peyton Thorne?
Was Peyton Thorne going to surprise anyone?
I don't know. He might surprise Gray for being really bad.
I'll take Connor Weigman. In his short time he's been able to play and see the field, I really think that he has shown some big steps in his development. I mean, you look at his career numbers, and he's only thrown 2 interceptions to the 16 touchdowns he's thrown. He's been a fairly accurate quarterback at 62%. And I think he makes a lot of smart decisions. He doesn't force a lot of things. He's very careful with what he does. So I think in the right system, in the right situation, Connor Weigman can turn out to be a really, really good quarterback. And it shouldn't be a real surprise to anyone, speaking that he was one of the top rated quarterbacks in his class, but he just kind of fell behind because Jimbo Fisher decided to coach at Texas A&M. So I think he can turn out to be a really great quarterback this year if he continues to develop the way I think he will.
I think Brock Vandagriff at Kentucky could be a really sneaky good quarterback for the Wildcats there. He was a 5-star recruit, like I mentioned, at Georgia. Didn't get his chance because Carson Beck beat him out. But to be a 5-star recruit and to be at Georgia, you had to be at least good at quarterback. And I think working under Mark Stoops there at Kentucky and having Barryon Brown at receiver, he's one of the most explosive players in the country. I think Brock Vandagriff has a lot of weapons and a lot of people around him to succeed. And I think he could surprise a lot of fans. And Kentucky could be sitting as an 8 or 9 win team, even though their schedule is not favorable like a lot of teams in the SEC. Who might disappoint fans, Nathan, other than Peyton Thorne disappointing Gray?
Brady Cook. Brady Cook is a simple answer, especially with some of the decisions he made last season. I go back to the LSU game, number 1, with some of the things he did in that game really just made me sit back and scratch my head while I was watching it. But I think his decision-making has to improve if he wants to continue to I think for Missouri to have success, he has to continue to improve and really develop. But his recognition's got to be better. I think he's got to take care of himself more. He put himself in situations where he could have gotten hurt more times than not. I think that's a big thing when you look at quarterbacks in the conference and their decision making. I think that's a big thing. But I mean, you talk about the loss of Cody Schrader to the Missouri offense. Not having as good of a back there to help support you, especially I know Cody Schrader wasn't like the greatest pass blocker ever at the running back position, but I mean he had a lot of heart when it came to it, and he gave him an option out of the backfield to throw to. But not having that, there's not really as much of a safety valve for Brady Cook as there was last season. I think teams definitely will. Play heavier on Luther Burden if they weren't last season. They definitely will now. So you can't just throw it to him and expect him to catch everything. I think that's why Brady Cook will probably take a step back. Just not in the same situations as some of these other quarterbacks like you talked about. Not a lot of talent surrounding him. Even with what they currently have on the roster, I just don't know if Eli Drinkwitz has developed players well enough or recruited well enough to have Missouri back to where they were last year, and that includes Brady Cook.
I think Garrett Nussmeier might disappoint fans. Nick Saban said he's very similar to a guy like Mac Jones, waiting his turn and being invested in that program. But you kind of touched on it earlier, Nathan, with them losing a lot of weapons offensively. Talk about Malik Neighbors leaving, Brian Thomas, the big vertical threat there. Their number 1 receiver going into the season is Kyron Lacey. I'm not 100% sold on Kyron Lacey. I'm not sure if he's going to be the next great LSU receiver. Maybe he is. But There's a lot of question marks there. The running back leaves, Logan Diggs. The number one running back now is Josh Williams. Can he be what LSU running backs have been in the past for supporting their quarterbacks? I don't think he can be. So I think Garrett Nussmeier has a lot of struggles, and I don't think he plays up to the standard that LSU quarterbacks have been under Jaden Daniels, Joe Burrow. I mean, there's a lot of expectations right there, and I just don't think he gets LSU back to what they were under Joe Burrow in his final season. Continuing to talk about players, Nathan, let's talk about our expectations or our predictions for the best offensive player award winner and best defensive player award winner. Jaden Daniels won the offensive player last year, and Dallas Turner won the defensive player. Talking about offensive player first, who do you think takes this home? Is it a quarterback or is it a skill position player?
I think it's going to turn out to be quarterback, and I think it'll probably end up being Jalen Milroe just because of how versatile he is. You talk about through the air and what he's been able to do on the ground. And he's spectacular on the ground. I think that's been established enough. But especially I've talked about already, if Kalen DeBoer has developed him well enough and turned him into the type of passer that Michael Penix was, or anywhere close to that, then Jalen Milroe might win the Heisman because of that. So I think with that, he probably would lock up Offensive Player of the Year. And some other guys to watch. I mean, Quinn Ewers is definitely up there. You talk about any of the quarterbacks we talked about, really. And then if you wanted to pick a receiver that might step up, I mean, Luther Burns been up there before. But I really like what Squirrel White has done at Tennessee. I think he's had some flashes last season, and if he can continue to develop, then maybe he can be this very dark horse. Because at this point, I think it's just a quarterback award for best offensive player, besides Devontae Smith or a great running back stepping up. Is basically a quarterback award. So I would probably go Jalen Milroe at this point.
I'd have to agree. Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, I think, can easily win this award, but they're not as versatile using their legs as somebody like Jalen Milroe. I think that sets him apart from the other guys that could have a chance at the quarterback position. Is Milroe is a lot more versatile. He proved it last season, and if he plays like you said, Nathan, even close to what Michael Penix did under Kalen DeBoer at Washington, this would be an easy award for him to win, and he could compete for the Heisman race. I think the expectation is for him to compete for the Heisman, but if he can even get this award, I think it'd be great things for Jalen Milroe and his confidence in this Alabama team in the first year under Kalen DeBoer. So talking about defensive player now, Dallas Turner wins that award and heads off to the NFL. Does another pass rusher win this award, or are we thinking maybe a defensive back?
I'm gonna it's the easiest thing ever to come out here and say that James Pierce would win it for Tennessee. I mean, I don't know. You're not sold on? Well, I think
he didn't even play third downs last season for Tennessee, so I don't get this hype around him. He's not Will Anderson.
He's just versatile in the way he does things, and I like the way he plays. He has a lot of tenacity. But anyway, he would not be my pick at this point in time. I think the Ole Miss transfer, Walter Nolan, is going to surprise a lot of people with what he's going to be able to do at Ole Miss. I think him transferring away from Texas A&M was really just what he needed just to go to a new place and really develop more. I don't think Jimbo Fisher did him any favors with that whole recruiting class. But I mean, he's going to shine on the Ole Miss defense and really be the centerpiece of it. I expect him to be a leader and to really communicate and have that Ole Miss defense looking better than it was last year and the year before that and the year before that and the year before that, because they really struggle at some points, and that is because they lack a leader. But I think Walter Nolan can be that guy.
I think if Oklahoma exceeds expectations, like I kind of mentioned earlier in the show, I think Danny Stutzman can be a dark horse here, tackle machine for Oklahoma, their leader on the defensive side of the football. But I think for me, the person I'm going to pick is the edge, Trey Moore at Texas, coming over from UTEP. He did have 14 sacks last season. Granted, it was against lesser competition, but he is a mountain of a man. He is a amazing pass rusher. And I think the competition he goes against in the SEC will not bother him at all. He is just a great player, has a great motor, gets to that quarterback, proven with his 14 sacks last season. So I think Trey Moore does end up winning this award for Texas and has a monster season for the Longhorns there. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening and watching Students of the Game.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.